I'm going to start off by introducing Stephanie, and then she will help us out a little bit more with introducing Mary.
Hi, so you can hear me? Great.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I've got one screen for my name where I can see all you guys, and then I have the iPhone where you guys can see me. It's nothing worse than being talked to by a blank screen. So I have a question first of all, for those of you who joined, how many of you Googled what is a watershed before you came? None of you needed to Google it? So Mary and I have been talking about doing some watershed education for a while now, and thanks to Rachel, actually, we can actually bring this to you. We have been talking about it for a couple of years, though. I definitely feel myself that there's a great need to understand it. We have this word watershed, and yet how many of us really learnt what a watershed was in any of our formal education? I actually learned about a watershed when I became a science teacher for middle schoolers. That's where I did my my student teaching many years ago, and I was just so fascinated by this little kit that they put together just to show these kids how water will flow down the hills to collect in some sort of a water body, and just to understand really that that's how those parameters create those watersheds, and that's what a watershed is. So I think it is a word that it is a a jargon word where people can get overwhelmed and not really know what it is. So if none of you have any problems knowing what a watershed is, we can just move straight on and just get more details from Mary about one of the two watersheds that Bloomfield sits in. Well, just to give you an example, really, when you go to Penwood, Penwood is right along the Simsbury Bloomfield line, almost getting close to there. So those who may be listening to this recording but aren't in this session here, when the water hits our hill, think about how that water runs down that hill and where it's going to collect. So basically it's a collection basin, it's a drainage basin, and that's really what a watershed is. So there are wonderful diagrams. I was going to do a little screen share here, but I think people can get some wonderful images about what a watershed looks like. This is hopefully going to be the first of a series of watershed talks. We actually have Heather Geist here in the meeting we see as well, and she's going to be doing a talk in a few weeks' time on the Farmington River watershed. So again, Bloomfield sits in two watersheds, and I'm going to hand it over to Mary to do her talk, which I've listened to a few times over, and it's just a wonderful talk. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I have all these times. Okay, so hope to see you again in the future in other talks as well.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Steph.
All right, Michelle, am I ready to screen share? Okay, and I'm going to go for the whole desktop, and then we'll just move on to. So the Park River Regional Watershed is a 78 square mile watershed, and we are. I want to just thank Stephanie and the Bloomfield Public Library for inviting us this evening, because Bloomfield is actually an important municipality within the watershed area. And whoops. There we go. So this is going to be a lot of information, and I will move through it kind of rapidly. But the most important thing to remember is to conserve and revive nature as functional ecosystems, especially along waterways, especially in urban suburban neighborhoods. And this is a simple idea, but it's essential, and because of the many beneficial values. And this recommendation really comes after over a decade of research, not only my research, but research that's others, so many partners along the North Branch and Park River watershed. So the Park River watershed is named after the first public park in the United States that was paid for with public dollars. And it wasn't the first public park, because that's actually the Boston Common, and it's not Central Park in New York City, which was paid for with private funds. But there's a significance to the fact that Bushnell Park, which was once called Hartford Central Park, was paid for by public dollars, because it became the model for future public parks across America. So we're more familiar with it, maybe Bushnell Park as it looked in this view with the Capitol, which is one of the reasons why the Park River Regional Watershed was transformed from a brownfield, basically from a railroad yard, from a tannery, from an industrial site, into a park that could host the state capitol, which was going back and forth between Hartford and New Haven. And in 1870, this image was actually of this kind of pastoral, bucolic, or picturesque park for the citizenry was created after many people had envisioned a more romantic relationship with nature throughout our regional watershed. And here is a view from the rim from the what we would call the Metacomet Ridge. It was called Mount Video, which was the seat of Daniel Wadsworth's, probably a summer home. And this rather romantic painting was done in 1828, 50 years before the Bushnell Park was fully completed. So the ideas that come forth really have to begin before our plans begin, the cultural values for nature and our relationship with nature. So where are we today? So today, the Park River Regional Watershed is one of the most heavily developed watersheds within the entire Connecticut River watershed. So this, the Connecticut River watershed, which flows from Maine and parts of Quebec through New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, is largely rural or forested land until you get into the lower reaches of the watershed, Springfield, Hartford, and Middletown. And here we have it here. Our drinking water comes from the larger Farmington River watershed, which is about, I think, 670 square miles. I'm blanking on that. Square acres, whereas the Park River Regional Watershed, square miles, is a 78 square mile watershed. The red is developed land, the green is forested land. And this is a very important point, because how our Environmental Protection Agency in the latter 20th and early 21st century really saw the Park River Regional Watershed as someone once said to me, a throwaway watershed. They felt like there was really nothing here. And often land use maps, such as this land use map, would show that there really wasn't large patches of nature within the city. And that's what many Environmental Protection Agency people, biologists and so forth, that were trained in the 20th century were really looking for larger intact landscapes. Whereas the Park River Regional Watershed was full of parking lots and buildings and infrastructure, residences, etc. But for me, I actually live in this area of Hartford in the West End. And one of these tiny little dots along the river is actually just a gorgeous landscape for many people to seek out a little respite from their day along the North Branch of the Park River. So I begin to ask a number of questions, and with actually support from the Farmington River Watershed Association and the Rivers Alliance of Connecticut, we motivated the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to do the North Branch Park River Watershed Management Plan, which is only the northern quarter of the entire Park River regional watershed. So here's the rim of the watershed. Again, the Metacomet Ridge, basically, we're very familiar with Hugh Blind Tower. And if you were looking east across the watershed, you would see downtown Hartford in this area. And of course, the entire 78 square mile watershed flows out to the Connecticut River through a conduit that's buried under I-84. And I'm less interested in the buried conduit, which is a very complex infrastructure project for a variety of reasons, including that it is structurally integral to I-84, and it's beyond the scope of the interests of the work the Park Watershed does to improve it. I consider myself really, and the goal of Park Watershed as a kind of a birds and butterfly issue, which means we're really looking at landscapes above, upstream of the conduits. And for the North Branch Park River Watershed Management Plan, that's areas largely that are in Bloomfield. So you can see the Bloomfield town line here. The Bloomfield town line, as you can see, there's very minimal area of Bloomfields that's actually drains to the Farmington River watershed. The majority of Bloomfield's land area drains to the Park River regional watershed, most notably into the North Branch. Basically all of it goes into the North Branch. No parts of Bloomfield drain into the South Branch. But the other issue is that Bloomfield's development is largely concentrated in the lower reaches of the municipality. So over here is where Kopaka Plaza, where you have Home Depot and Lowe's, sort of big box stores and large parking lots. And here's Bloomfield Town Center. And that has impacted the watershed. So when we think of, again, this idea that basins, that one basin pours into another, within the greater Connecticut River watershed, there's the regional watershed, such as the Farmington River watershed and the Park River watershed. And within the Park River watershed, there's sub-basins. So there's the North Branch, 28 square miles, and the South Branch, which is 50 square miles. And then within the North Branch, there's sub-watersheds, which are Tumble Brook, Beaman's Brook, Filley Brook, and Washbrook. And all of those brooks, as they converge, which just south of Cottage Grove Road, form the North Branch of the Park River, which is an impaired waterway. And as you can see from this pie chart here, the majority of the North Branch Park River is 68% of the drainage basin. So as if it was a gigantic bathtub with irregular edges, 68% of that is actually within the town of Bloomfield. 17% of it is within the northwestern neighborhoods of West Hartford. Only 11% of the Park River, the North Branch, is in Hartford, the northern neighborhoods of Hartford, but that's actually where most of the flooding takes place. So anything that's done upstream, anything that's done on the land throughout Bloomfield or anywhere winds up in your water, going towards the Connecticut River, going to the Long Island Sound. And, this also includes combined sewage overflows, because often storm sewers that overflow on rainy days overflow in one of the 4 sanitary sewer overflows, outfalls that are managed by the MDC. And so, the problems of non-point source pollution are the #1 water quality problem in the United States. And we say non-point source pollution, but as a professional who worked for EPA told me there are points to non-point source pollution. It's just that they're tiny. And those points are bacteria, heavy metals that might come from your car, pesticides that might come from somebody's lawn, suspended solids because somebody didn't pick up their dog poop, nutrients from fertilizers, trash that somebody dropped out of their car, and increasingly heat from pavement as rainwater may hit a hot, large parking lot on a summer day and be shunted into a drain and into a waterway, which overflows downstream. This is just south of Asylum. And, this is a picture taken many years ago, but this is just a routine problem that's increasing, especially in the city of Hartford in the northwestern neighborhoods. So a lot of the work of the North Branch Park River Watershed Management Plan was to address the water quality issues more so than the quantity issues, because water quantity is actually managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, whereas water quality is managed by EPA. They're different divisions, but a lot of the public's interest really focuses on bicycle paths. That's been over the past 10 years, the largest expressed interest in from Bloomfield, especially from Bloomfield residents, is bringing a bicycle path into the city of Hartford. The problem is that the North Branch, because it hasn't been channelized, it does routinely flood, even though there's parking lots. So the debris that's left over, this is the parking lot we had the photograph of a few slides back. This is what's left over is sediment and debris that's pushed downstream. And so one of the problems with the idea of having a bicycle trail is that the North Branch isn't channelized, unlike Trout Brook, where they were able to build the bicycle trail along the edge of the channel that's been raised up out of the floodplain. The North Branch actually has unmodified floodplains, and we would like to see those parking lots, many of them are parking lots, restored as natural areas because of their ecosystem service benefits. And also we would like to see the trash that's coming from downstream minimized. So that's some of the work we did source to sea cleanups with the the work began doing a source to sea cleanup in relationship to the Farmington River Watershed Association, and then later the Connecticut River Conservancy. But we really focus now on just trying to bring about change at a large scale, these large planning efforts. So this is a map that shows proposed path of the East Coast Greenway, which would actually this map is showing it going down Scarborough Street, but people want to bring the path through the floodplains, which is here. But recently there's been a proposal to bring the bicycle trail through neighborhoods, urban neighborhoods that really need access to commuter pathways that they could use their bicycles on, pathways to schools. And that proposal is called the Heartline. And we advocate for those kind of large scale changes in development patterns, as did the study by the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program from the National Park Service that was done a few years ago, which they did a lot of field research along the North Branch of the Park River. And here again, this photo is from up near the University of Hartford, and their findings were pretty much the same as ours, is that the natural floodplains of the North Branch in the city of Hartford are receiving an extraordinary amount of water when there are flood conditions, and that it would be best to restore them as nature in the city. And that is increasingly critical because of the accelerating climate and biodiversity crises that are raising global temperatures and causing not only flooding, but also extreme heat and the prolonged droughts. So the benefit of the North Branch as a wilder floodplain where trees can fall over and leaves can be left as leaf litter, and there can be broken limbs and slow decay of soils, is that it feeds the wildlife that traveled along the pathway. And it also improves the water quality. So when we dump into the river, when we have permitted outfalls, as there are in Bloomfield, I believe there's 28 permitted outfalls in Bloomfield that flow into the North Branch of the Park River. When we have those, as you can see in this diagram, this is actually downstream in Hartford, there's water quality issues, right? It's not potable, it's not drinkable, it's not fishable, right? But when the waterway is surrounded by a landscape, the water quality actually is able to improve its oxygen content and other characteristics of better water quality. So that's the image that I keep behind me, is just right south of Albany Avenue. It's a beautiful place if we just give it the landscape. One of the most important lessons of having buried the Park River is that a river really isn't a river without its landscape. And that's kind of the message that I keep, that, you know, Park Watershed is really foregrounding now, especially because this is the year of Frederick Law Olmsted's birth. And that is an extraordinary understanding, because we were able to find a letter from Frederick Law Olmsted that described him walking along the North Branch of the Park River and recommending that the streets like Scarborough and Homestead Avenue be laid out far away from the river corridor in order to maintain better water quality and the scenic beauty of the riparian corridor. And you can see from this photograph that the density of trees along the North Branch of the Park River, whereas in our public park right now, what we have increasingly is recreational equipment that kind of chops up the park, right? We have our pond house, we've got parking lots, there's a new parking lot back here, there's tennis courts over here, there's baseball diamonds here and there. And this is a kind of common fate for many of our historic parks, is that they are becoming the sites for baseball recreational fields, which are very not natural, and some actually are synthetic turf fields. But right here, we have the opportunity along the North Branch of the Park River is to continue to restore nature as a wilder place that has more ecosystem service benefits that can be offered up within our high density urban neighborhoods. So by the way, there's somebody waiting to be admitted in the waiting room. Janice is in the waiting room for whatever it's worth. And so here is an image of the North Branch Park River within the city of Hartford. And I want to point out that this area, which is not in the image to the left, is actually the North Branch does begin in Bloomfield, just south of Cottage Grove Road, and it flows through a little bit of West Hartford before it flows into Hartford. This is Hartford Golf Club, which is actually in West Hartford. And this is, I believe, the Sunny Reach neighborhood. Yes, and this is the University of Hartford campus. And this is Bowles Park over here and Weaver. And this is an area that's increasingly being developed by the town of Bloomfield, even though it's actually a wetland. And this is causing increased flooding, not only along the North Branch, but also along the tributaries that flow through the Blue Hills neighborhood. Again, these are images for the North Branch Park River in Hartford, but we recommend this strategy for all the tributaries of the Park River and the tributaries of the North Branch, is to really understand how valuable the conservation of the riparian corridor is. And this is just an image of Central Park in New York City. This is roughly to scale. And this is an image of the Muddy River flowing through the Emerald Necklace in Back Bay of Boston. And what the Muddy River does is it connects the Fens, the Jamaica Pond, the Arnold Arboretum, and Franklin Park. And in some respects, we could see the North Branch of the Park River, as well as other tributaries, as serving that ecosystem connectivity between patches. And what that does is it gives us an opportunity to do what was already done. We have proof that it can be done, is improve our riparian corridors. So here's an example from, again, this is from Boston, the Muddy River, 1892. They restored the river, which was full of sewage, and it became this verdant landscape by 1920. This Emerald Necklace is currently being restored again right now by the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. So yeah, essential ecosystem benefits along these riparian corridors include the photosynthesis that generates oxygen, carbon storage, fruit, nuts, birds, nesting cavities, caterpillars, insects, migratory pathways, the coolness of the shade, floodplains, pollinators, turtles, macroinvertebrates, aquatic life. There's just so much that happens along these corridors that we really have to see them as a web of life, and that they're like the spine. So just imagine for a minute that you something happened to your body, maybe your arm or your finger or your spine. If you were to choose which to protect, I think we would all protect our spines. And that, in many respects, is the riparian corridor as it runs through our city. It is vital to so much life and so much ecosystem service benefits, that we can connect that, because really it's so volatile, especially as we enter into the climate, these heavy rains and droughts, these flash flooding, that we might as well conserve these riparian corridors, not just the North Branch, but Beaman's Brook, Filley Brook, Tumble Brook, and Wash Brook as well. And they're a place where insects can thrive, and the birds like the insects, and they move with the insects throughout the season as migratory pathways. So the riparian corridors, there's different widths of riparian corridors. They could be as short as 25 feet or as wide as 300 feet as areas that surround a waterway. So here's a diagrammatic waterway here. This is actually from an entirely different part of the globe, but it's a nice diagram that really shows how much happens within the riparian corridor of a waterway. And then this is a diagram down here that talks about the widths of riparian corridors, that the landscape or stream buffers, and how different widths function in different ways. So for instance, our flatter floodplains are wider, and those wide, flat floodplains are useful for sediment removal and flood mitigation. So Bloomfield, they've done a lot of really important conservation projects, but they are very aggressively developing downstream, their downstream communities. And that is, whereas they're preserving the landscapes upstream. And, there is an opportunity for them to more surgically think about how to conserve and set aside land use decisions around their waterways, rather than allowing water tributaries to be channelized, to be culverted, to floodplains, to be turned into parking lots, etc. Because what we've seen downstream is that it's just not good for nature. Here were two examples of green infrastructure features that were proposed in the 2010 North Branch Park River Watershed Management Plan. Neither of these were fulfilled, and it's great to have Stephanie on board and to have Sustainable Connecticut really highlighting the value of green infrastructure features. There were also some recommendations for the Laurel Elementary School, and I'm not sure those were fulfilled by the city as well. We are updating this plan in 2023 and 2024. The work will be done with the North Central Conservation District. And again, here we are with our current land use patterns. And when we look at these maps, we see patches. We see that the history of land use is donations or purchases of patches of land rather than conservation along the riparian corridors, along areas where there's connectivity of the ecosystem service benefits. And I think that this is an important transition that we need to make, is to recognize that we need to conserve the ecosystem service benefit rather than just focusing on a patch of land, which is actually, by the way we do conserve the patches, the watershed land around our drinking reservoir. There's very strict requirements about what land use can be land use permitted around the drinking water reservoir. This is just a little circle down here to show Elizabeth Park, and which is just a tiny park within the overall system of conservation. So why these is not, I must say, I'm going to keep moving more quickly here so that we can get to questions in the next 5 minutes. But this is actually one of the most important reasons why is Hartford really is, there's a high poverty and inequity in income in Hartford, and it's problematic that the issues of water quality pollution are kind of sent downstream by both Bloomfield and West Hartford. And, there's not a lot we can do about it without the law, like the Clean Water Act. But say, for instance, with the issues surrounding heat stress, at this time, there's very little legal recourse, as well as the issues surrounding habitat loss and fragmentation, especially in an urban area that's already been subjected to redlining. So this is a map of the redlining in Hartford, and it was a practice that established financing for real estate throughout the latter kind of mid-20th century. And even though these practices are presumably not in effect anymore, they are certainly, the effects are still lingering, where there's assumptions that, that one neighborhood is a hazardous neighborhood, or another neighborhood is definitely declining, or there's more still desirable or best landscapes. And those characteristics have very distinct relationships to the amount of nature within them. And, we can see the more hazardous neighborhoods are definitely declining, or hazardous, the Asylum Hill neighborhoods, the Upper Albany neighborhoods are labeled, or were labeled, definitely declining, and the West End was, quote unquote, still desirable. But there's more to it than just those labels, because what these red line neighborhoods and the sort of negligence in the development permitting has resulted in is the loss of nature within the neighborhoods. And this was a study from Richmond, Virginia, and you can see that the red line neighborhoods have very little tree canopy, right? Most of the tree canopy is, interestingly enough, along the James River, right? That's where the densest tree canopy is, most likely because there's access to water and there can be intact forests. But the problem with not having tree canopies is that we have these high summer temperatures, and they're much higher than areas where there's dense tree canopy. And those high summer temperatures have considerable impacts on people's health and well-being. And, you know, the large mature trees that can exist in a suburban neighborhood or even along the North Branch Park River Watershed Management or somewhere, a park where we prioritize nature, those trees, again, they host considerable establishment of insects and birds that come back generation after generation because they were maybe born in the tree, and they come back and there's still insect populations that are high up in the canopies, caterpillars that we never see, but that serve as food, as habitat for birds and wildlife, and their nesting and their procreation. So there's just no way that we can replace these large, beautiful trees with newly planted trees rapidly. The benefits, the ecosystem service benefits of these large trees, many of which are along the riparian corridor, that they can exist there without becoming a liability issue, they cannot be easily replaced by a newly planted tree. This is actually the size of a tree in Bloomfield at a medical, you know, my doctor's office moved from St. Francis to just south of Cottage Grove Road, and this was a newly planted tree in the parking lot, and I measured it and brought it back, and if anything, this is an exaggeration to the size that it actually is in comparison to the larger tree. And I'm sure, you know, a forest was cleared in order to create that parking lot. So why do those big trees matter? Again, going back to the issue of heat, those trees need water, but they produce shade. And assuming that we can just create urban environments without shade really puts our urban communities at risk. This is actually a synthetic turf field. It's 44 degrees hotter than a big tree, very similar to the tree in the previous image, is right here along Vernon Street. The parking lot just a little to the north or south, actually, yeah, south, is 114 degrees. Under this tree, it's 92. In the grass soccer field, it's only 109 degrees. This was a very hot day. The high temperature was 29, but these were ambient temperatures at the surface level in those areas. And so again, these treeless environments are very problematic because it dehydrates the body, which can lead to heat stroke, cramps, rashes, exhaustion. It can trigger dizziness, headache, nausea, and irritability. And I want to mention that there's an extraordinary piece by Elizabeth Colbert in this week's New Yorker, where she actually swallowed a pill that's a body temperature in order to understand how temperature affects her constitution. And so here's an old urban heat island profile. I learned about this when I first started working on green infrastructure issues, which I began with green roofs. And it's interesting because the lowest spot of kind of the depression of the temperature in an urban area is over the park. It's not over a street tree, right? It's not the street tree, it's over a large intact forest like Central Park. What I think is missing from this image is where that riparian corridor, how that might bring the temperature down even further. Because as we all know, as we approach any stream, as on a hot day, there's a coolness around it. So this is just an image of how much water is in our body, right? Our brain is 80 to 85% water. Our hearts are 75 to 80% water. Basically, our livers are 70 to 75% water. We're like the earth. We're like the planet Earth, and we're not going to do well in the heat, and neither is the planet. So that's part of the work that we're doing, is understanding the relationship of nature and the city. And we want to encourage people to think of our watershed as a park river watershed rather than a hog river. We want to believe that there's a gorgeous nature waiting to be uncovered under the parking lots. And this is an old discussion. This is an editorial from 1883 where the anonymous writer chided people for calling it the Hog River. But he mentioned that the North Branch was once called the Woods River. This is an old map, the first published map of the rivers. And here it is, the Woods River. This is before, I guess, Bloomfield was carved out of this area as a municipality. This land was once the land inhabited by the Paquanuk, the Wangunks, the Secogs, and the Tunxis peoples. We know things change over time, and certainly when we look back at these historic maps and we think about the peoples who once occupied this place, we can begin to dream again about how to change our nature, our city for the future. So we hope you all, keep learning about what we can do. We can voice support. There's a convergence of opportunities because of the Governor's Council on Climate Change, the Biden's America the Beautiful, the MDC Clean Water Project, the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. If now, not, why not? If not now, when are we going to really step up and speak up for nature in our cities? And again, the green infrastructure strategies like restoring corridors, open space, green jobs, better real estate values, mitigating climate change, reducing summer heat, all of that, so important. We're in the Anthropocene. Right now, we're living somewhere in here. This is the population increase by 2050. We need to be building nature back into our cities. It's been done before. This is Fort I say Tyrone, but that's not the right pronunciation. But this is near the cloisters in New York City, so we can build nature back into our neighborhoods. And thank you for being patient. That went a little longer than I expected, but I'm hoping that it worked out for everybody.